Welcome back. You're still watching the SABC News Channel. Now, Interpol in the SADC region has raised concerns about the increase in cybercrimes and the emergence of new terrorist groups that might threaten stability in the region and the rest of the continent. South African National Police Commissioner Fannie Masemola says that these and other cross-border organised crimes have a dire impact on SADC. He's called on stronger partnerships to combat these crimes. The remarks were made during Regional Police Chiefs Cooperation Organisation's annual meeting in Pretoria.
The 27th Annual General SABC meeting. South Africa is currently chairing the 16-member body where police chiefs from the region join the gathering. The 16 countries include Angola, Botswana, DRC, Lesotho, Mauritius, Madagascar, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Eswatini, Seychelles, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe and Comoros. The meeting aims to allow the regional bloc's police leaders and their teams to discuss progress in efforts to combat transnational organized crime. As SABC chairperson, National Police Commissioner General Masemola welcomed the group by calling for a united force against organized crime.
It is through these gatherings such as this one, that we will hopefully establish tangible responses in the form of joint operations, training, capacity building interventions. This in a bid to ensure that we clamp down on any form of transnational crime ravaging the SADC region.
This week's meeting will put the spotlight on progress made in the fight against transnational organized crime like human and drug trafficking. Interpol in the region raised concerns about cybercrime and threats of terrorist groups.
We cannot ignore the continued pervasive issues of terrorism that are happening in the Southern Africa. In particular, there is a consensus that the Islamic State has identified sub-Saharan Africa as the next frontier for regrouping and rebirth.
Criminals no longer have regard and respect for our physical borders and are spawning their criminal activities across nations, regions, and internationally. This thus calls for us as a region to converge, collaborate, synergize, coordinate our efforts to fight transnational organized crime within a common vision, understanding, and trust.
From police ministers in the region, a call for stronger regional partnerships.
Let us pool our human and financial resources together in order for us to effectively combat crime. Sharing of criminal intelligence, relevant information, and expertise is of paramount importance.
And more shots fired by the South African police minister.
Minister Kazembe, there are no free lunches. The price of you being here is that we all surrender our criminals.
SABC was established in 1995 to allow police in the region to merge forces and resources to strengthen the fight against transnational organized crime in SADC. South Africa is currently SABC chair, and Namibia will take over next. Patricia Fasachi, SABC News in Pretoria.
Well, to talk to us a little bit more about this issue and the threats of cybercrime in the SADC region, we're now joined via Zoom by Jan Vermeulen, who's editor of MyBroadband. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, and always good to talk to you.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
All right. I wonder if cybercrime should have been higher on the list of priorities quite a long time ago already.
Yes, indeed. It does feel like we've kind of waited for it to become a complete crisis before actually addressing the issue. The members of the industry have warned for a long time now that South Africa and the whole region is quite vulnerable. And now, we've got hacking groups coming, to the media and saying, that South Africa is a playground for cyber criminals. That they're able to get at people's personal information, including that of President Cyril Ramaphosa, with relative ease. And yet it's because we have made very little investment as a country from a government perspective into cybersecurity. A lot of that investment has happened in the private sector, obviously, especially businesses that rely on the safety of their online systems like banks and so on. But government is unfortunately very far behind, and they handle incredibly sensitive information of its citizens.
Help me understand. I mean, we're sitting in SADC, we're talking about regional responses, but these guys could be sitting in Australia, sitting in India, sitting in America. Once you're online, there really are no borders or regions.
Right. Despite some countries' best efforts to wall themselves off. But yeah, I mean, we're seeing an incredible amount of activity from, for example, countries like Russia and China attack traffic. And Russia is well known, for example, to have a fairly sophisticated cyber warfare suite. Now, fortunately, I think us in South Africa, we don't have to worry about the Russians too much, not nearly as much as other countries do. We're just not a priority target. But we have seen some reports of them, for example, testing new weapons, cyber weapons in South Africa to see how they would work. This is something that is an incredible threat to our country. So just off the top of my head, some examples in the past year is Transnet was the victim of a ransomware attack, bringing our ports to a grinding halt, causing massive supply chain disruptions right after the riots in July. Something we could ill afford and just put even more strain on our economy and jobs. It just has far-reaching repercussions. And then we had a ransomware attack on the Department of Justice, which brought our master's offices to a grinding halt for weeks, perhaps even months, if you count how long it took them to get everything operational again. It's a huge problem. And yes, exactly as you say, this is a cross-border issue. You can have an attacker sitting anywhere in the world, really, and targeting infrastructure from wherever they can gain entry. And so South Africa, and that's these particular damaging infrastructure attacks. Then there's scammers, and at least there. The Hawks and other law enforcement in South Africa work really well with, especially for the FBI, to target scamming groups that have set up shop in South Africa. But that usually requires that those scammers go after the citizens of that other law enforcement agency, right? So if they've targeted US citizens, then the FBI gets involved. If they've targeted, the citizens of Australia or some other country, then that law enforcement gets involved. But otherwise, we're on our own to deal with those kinds of scammers. And we don't have the same kind of expertise or sophistication or experience as some of these other countries have in dealing with cyber criminals.
And this leads me to my next question. Who is supposed to be protecting us? We know that the police have a certain role to play in terms of protecting us from crime. We've got the legal system protecting us in terms of justice. Who's supposed to be protecting us? Because I've received a couple of emails over the last 2 years where they say, we're sorry, it may be that your data may have been compromised.
Yes, exactly that. And the legal system is a deterrent, right? This is something that economies like the United States gets right in some respects, that there is this threat that the FBI will catch you. Whereas in South Africa, that threat is almost non-existent, that you will eventually be caught and brought to justice. And so, but that is reactive. And while there's some deterrent, if we had an effective policing and justice system, that is reactive. In terms of protection, the first line of defense has to be the people who are custodians of our data. That's the first one. And then we can talk about all the reasonable steps that these organizations have to take to prevent breaches of their systems that could cause infrastructure to be crippled or data to be stolen. But first things first is there's private entities like the credit bureaus in South Africa that even under POPIA get a bit of a free pass when it comes to the private information of South Africans and people who are resident in South Africa. So we'll hopefully see our information regulator being able to bare her teeth when it comes to these kinds of situations, because there's supposed to be penalties on companies that handle your data negligently, right? And hopefully we'll start to see the threat of that kind of fines and other penalties, sanctions, being some kind of deterrent to companies to kind of encourage them to not harvest so much data and hold so much data, that they only hold the data that they need to render the services that they need to render. That's one thing. And then the other big custodian of private data in South Africa is the government. And its systems are unfortunately woefully inadequate for the task. And it's going to need to step up, honestly, its spending. And where that money is going to come from is anybody's guess. But right now, South Africa is incredibly vulnerable to cybercrimes as a result of a lack of urgency in how serious this stuff can be. I think everybody, if you tell people about the dangers of cybercrime and identity theft, it's felt for the last 10 years as if I'm speaking to an incredibly suspicious crowd. They're like, no, man, we've got much bigger fish to fry than that. But as the whole world has moved increasingly online, as so much of our identity, of our money, of our functions as human beings have moved online, I think people have finally started to realize how incredibly important it is for our data and for our systems to be safeguarded.
I don't know maybe if this is futuristic, but I certainly think it should be happening now, that where we actually have a Department of Cyber Defense that is dedicated to protecting us. If we are so vulnerable now, it's not a quick jump from, the ransomware type of attacks to full-on terror attacks where our electricity systems goes down, banking systems are sabotaged. We are on the front line of potential disasters, I guess.
Yes, I don't want to sound like a Jeremiah, but that's a pretty accurate characterization. I'm hopeful that the terrorists on our doorstep don't have the sophistication for that kind of attack. But hoping is not good enough for a government. Our government does need to take steps to protect itself, because it's not just about incursions into our borders, physical violence. An incredible amount of damage can be done, and as we've seen, if infrastructure is attacked. And so banking systems, I think, will be quite resilient. Our networks will be quite resilient. But if the power goes down, so hopefully Eskom has relatively good defenses up, but if the power goes down, none of those systems work, regardless of how well defended they might be. And so it's essential for our core critical infrastructure to be very well defended. Yeah, and a type of cyber defense force to be part of the National Defence Force is certainly not a bad idea. But getting the necessary resources and training for a unit like that, so that they're actually serving a function and aren't just wearing a badge, is easier said than done, and needs to be done with political will and purpose and a focus on results rather than it just being a checkbox.
Jan Vermeulen, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much indeed for joining us and helping us get a better understanding of these threats that we're facing. Thanks for your time.